Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, proud to support the mission of KPBS and privileged to serve San Diego clients. Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, helping homeowners maintain drain, heating, and cooling systems since 1978. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. By viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening. It's Friday, January 21st. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. New COVID vaccine requirements are going into effect for non-U.S. citizens at the nation's land border crossings. KPBS reporter Alexandra Rangel has more from San Isidro.
Manuela Hernandez was standing in line for 30 minutes at the San Isidro port of entry Friday morning. She was coming back from visiting family in Tijuana. Although she is a U.S. national and doesn't need to show vaccination proof upon crossing into the U.S., she shows us her vaccine card and says, "You never know when you will need it." Starting Saturday, the Department of Homeland Security will be requiring all non-U.S. citizens entering the country to be fully vaccinated for COVID-19. This includes all land ports and ferry terminals along both the Canadian and Mexican borders. Wilson Portocarrero with Customs and Border Protection says before there were some non-U.S. citizens that were excluded from having to show vaccine proof. Most of these cases involve people traveling for essential reasons.
Before you had, so for instance, truck drivers or individuals who crossed into the country with visas that were for essential reasons. That were allowed to come in without being vaccinated.
These new changes will now include everyone with the exception of U.S. citizens, U.S. nationals, and lawful permanent residents. DHS says travelers must verbally attest to their COVID-19 status and provide proof of a CDC-approved vaccination.
We're going to report, be only verbally attest to their vaccination status, but be prepared to present that proof upon request by an officer.
Portocarrero recommends all travelers have their documents on hand to help decrease border wait times.
Pues está bien porque esto es seguridad de nosotros mismos.
Hernandez says asking for vaccine proof is the right thing to do for everyone's safety. Alexandra Rangel, KPBS News.
New CDC studies are providing a first-hand look at vaccine effectiveness during the Omicron surge. Isabel Rosales breaks down the growing push to get Americans to roll up their sleeves again.
The best case yet for getting boosted.
Are you ready?
3 new CDC studies mark the first real-life data on the effects of boosters against Omicron.
These new studies should erase any doubt about the importance of boosters.
The research has enormous scope, looking into millions of cases across the U.S. Here's what they reveal. If you were boosted, you had a 90% chance of avoiding hospitalization during the recent surge. In comparison, getting only 2 shots was 57% effective when it had been at least 6 months past the second shot. When it comes to the sickest of the sick, if you had 2 doses of an mRNA vaccine but no booster, you had a 38% chance of avoiding a visit to the ER or urgent care. With a booster, that jumped to 82%. And boosters offered better protection against catching Omicron in the first place or developing symptoms if infected. Top medical experts like Dr. Anthony Fauci believe the CDC's definition of what it means to be fully vaccinated needs a booster update.
It's going to be a matter of when, not if.
So far, fewer than half of people in the U.S. who are eligible to get a booster have gotten one.
I know people are sick and tired of hearing about COVID, but if getting the booster dose is what allows everybody to move on with their lives, I think those who are vaccinated are ready to hear that message.
All 3 studies found the unvaccinated, about 20% of all eligible Americans, face the highest risks of becoming sick. In Washington, Isabel Rosales, KPBS News.
Kids 12 and over could soon be making their own decisions about vaccinations in California. KPBS health reporter Matt Hoffman has more on the bill aiming to make it happen.
The bill would allow teens to consent to vaccinations just like adults are doing here at the county's El Cajon COVID-19 vaccination site.
Still doing okay?
Right now, minors in California need parental permission for coronavirus and other vaccines, but Senate Bill 866 would change that, allowing teens 12 and over to consent to vaccines that are approved by the FDA without their parents' okay. The proposed legislation is being brought on by State Senator Scott Wiener. In support of the bill, he says that unvaccinated teens are put at risk, put others at risk, and make schools less safe. They often cannot participate in sports or go to friends' homes. Let's let teens protect their health. SB 866 is co-authored by local assembly member Dr. Akilah Weber. She's a former Rady Children's Hospital doctor who represents parts of La Mesa, Lemon Grove, and San Diego. The bill's authors say those 12 and over are already allowed to seek medical care in some cases, including the treatment of sexual diseases. This newly proposed legislation would not allow vaccine providers to provide other medical services that are outside the scope of vaccinations. In El Cajon, Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
For the Jewish community of faith, this weekend will be the first services held following the hostage standoff at a Texas synagogue. KPBS reporter Kitty Alvarado visited a local rabbi who has a connection to the rabbi in Texas and says he will use this time to remind his congregation of its resilience.
So this is the sanctuary.
Rabbi Jason Navarez leads Congregation Beth Israel, the largest Jewish congregation in San Diego.
Love your neighbor as yourself. That for me is critical, and it's central. It's in our holiness code.
But last Friday, an act of kindness to a stranger by his dear friend Rabbi Charlie Crichton Walker inside a Texas synagogue by the same name turned into an 11-hour standoff. Rabbi Navarez got a message from a mutual friend.
For me, it was heartache. I was just more concerned about Charlie and thinking about his family.
He says the training they've gone through and practice regularly not only helped his friend survive, but helped him get everyone to safety.
I can't use any other word to describe him other than as a hero.
He says his congregation and almost all Jewish leaders work with local, state, and federal agencies to ensure their places of worship are as safe as possible.
Lockdowns, active shooter training that we have to go through in order to maintain our communities. It helps us, and it helped Rabbi Charlie in this moment.
They take security very seriously at Beth Israel.
It's a sad reality. It's a necessary reality.
It's not an open campus. Entering their place of worship is something many of us have never had to experience just to practice our faith.
And you guys are good to go in?
Rabbi Navarez says this doesn't mean they don't welcome the stranger.
For us, we're always going to welcome people, but first, we may have to vet them a little bit.
And says that it's not what they do inside the walls, but outside of them that builds community with people they have nothing in common with. And that message is important for everyone. And it begins with our words.
Charlie was able to use goodness and kindness in order to bring an end, a successful end to this painful tragedy. And I believe that the more we promote kindness, it becomes infectious. And that is the language I'd rather spew into the world than the language of hate.
As the sun goes down and they observe this Sabbath, he says they will honor his friend Rabbi Charlie and use this moment to remember their strength.
These moments do not anchor us in our pain and sorrow. They help us transcend to moments where we can continue to be a light unto others and do goodness and justice in this world.
Kitty Alvarado, KPBS News.
More than a year after 75% of voters approved the creation of an independent commission on police practices, the city has been unable to actually create the commission. After a first draft failed to pass last June, a new draft ordinance was released last week. More last-minute changes were made ahead of today's Public Safety and Livable Communities meeting.
Then we get this amendment last night, and it was good that there were amendments made, but, 15 hours is not enough time to really analyze it. And I think the community really deserves that. PSLN, the Public Safety Livable Neighborhoods Committee of the City Council that is hearing this ordinance, certainly can set another meeting in another week to 10 days to allow people time to really digest it.
And we just learned that the committee voted for the draft ordinance to go on to the full city council. The next step will be a town hall meeting. The North County Transit District Board voted to install fencing along the railroad tracks in Del Mar, saying it's about safety. North County reporter Alexander Nguyen explains why some residents are against the plan.
This is a familiar scene in Del Mar, a surfer crossing the tracks to access the beach. And it's illegal, but residents here have done it for more than 100 years. The North County Transit District wants to put a stop to that. They say it's a safety risk. There have been hundreds of near misses and 5 deaths in Del Mar in the past 5 years. The NCTD is proposing to put 3,700 feet of fencing along the tracks right here in Del Mar, near homes. They say the fence will make the track safer, but residents here say that's a weak argument.
People have to be on guard knowing that they're by the railroad tracks and have to look around. I mean, there's hazards everywhere.
Carmel Valley resident Andy Rusnek likes to walk his dog on a path along the tracks. He says fencing along the track would ruin the view of the bluffs. For residents living along the tracks like Stephanie Tarkington, the view isn't the issue. It's the access.
We have lived on this street since 1970, and so we have seen tens of thousands of people cross without any kind of injury at all. And so we really feel that access here is incredibly important.
NCTD board voted 7-0 to install the fence, despite opposition from Del Mar and the Coastal Commission. The fence would be installed in 2 phases. Phase 1 will go from Coast Highway to 6th Street. The second phase would go from 6th to the Bluffs. Del Mar Councilmember Terry Gastolin is on the NCTD board, but abstained from last night's vote. She says NCTD is forcing the plan on the city.
NCTD has said they will put up 6-foot welded wire mesh fencing unless Del Mar takes on ownership of the fencing and maintains it forever going forward. That is not something that Del Mar can do.
The city has until February 28th to come to an agreement. Otherwise, the NCTD will proceed with its plan. Alexander Nguyen, KPBS News.
Vice President Kamala Harris visited San Bernardino today to highlight funds for wildfire prevention included in the infrastructure law. She also announced the Biden administration is committing $600 million in disaster relief funding for California.
This epidemic of wildfires is relatively new in that there have always been wildfires in one form or another, but the frequency and the intensity and the ubiquity of wildfires just in the last couple of years, as the governor talked about, is extraordinary and requires our federal government to see what is happening and act in real time.
You look at this map, the vice president attended a briefing on efforts to prevent and mitigate wildfires. The Biden administration recently announced plans to more than double the use of controlled fires and logging to reduce vegetation that fuels fires.
We've got an upper low developing over parts of the southwest here, and that means some changes for us. It's actually going to mean some strong winds heading into tomorrow, and these are going to be those Santa Ana winds that are going to be cooler and dry, keeping things bright. No marine layer towards the coast. So here's that wind direction again coming through us for the rest of tonight and into tomorrow. It's why there have been several concerns for either wind advisories or even some high wind warnings through some of our northern tier here. So we do have that concern for some very gusty winds getting through tonight and throughout the day into tomorrow. So it's going to start off as a bit of a different setup for us for our Saturday and into the weekend. Things will quiet down, though, into Sunday. Overall tonight, though, 51 for the low. Oceanside coming in at 40 degrees. Meanwhile, Mount Laguna back into the lower 30s. Again, kind of a cooler pattern here as this upper low develops. It will mean some snow showers across the Four Corners. So if you're traveling, keep that in mind. But overall, again, it's just those gusty winds for us that we'll be dealing with as we head through tomorrow. Look at all the sunshine, though. Bright 70 for the high. Chula Vista coming in at 68 as you enter towards Borrego Springs. Temperatures there in the upper 60s. Getting into Sunday, what happens? Well, this low starts to move out. That's why it will get less windy as we close out the weekend, and things staying quiet into Monday, where we start to add maybe a few marine clouds back. Temperatures there in the upper 60s for highs along the coast, and we'll be in the mid 60s for Tuesday. Inland locations hanging out in the 70s through the next couple of days, keeping things bright and dry. No real signs of rain for us. We could start to warm up, though, heading into the middle of next week. Until then, though, mountain locations somewhere in the 40s. In fact, we'll be close to 50 degrees for Monday and Tuesday. And as we look at some of those desert locations here, hanging out in the 70s once we get past Saturday, which is still a bit cool but dry. For KPBS News, I'm AccuWeather meteorologist Melissa Constanzer.
More turnover in San Diego County's education leadership. The superintendent of Grossmont Union High School District announced she's retiring at the end of this school year. Teresa Kemper has been with Grossmont Union 33 years and was named district superintendent in the summer of 2020. Along with the pandemic, Kemper has also had to deal with allegations of racism involving a campus security officer at Valhalla High School. The Grossmont Union Board will conduct a nationwide search with hopes of naming a new superintendent by May. Dozens of East County and South Bay families are celebrating high school graduations tonight for students who overcame tremendous challenges. They are part of the statewide Learn for Life Charter School Network. The program offers one-on-one teachers to young people who dropped out of school because they were homeless, have disabilities, or faced other obstacles that left them without an education.
Are foster youth and they have kids. Some of them are English learners. They have to have a full-time job so they can support themselves and even their family, sometimes even their family members. And that's just a short-term goal is completing their high school diploma.
Learn for Life helps more than 40,000 students in need across California every year. They get their diplomas and often have job opportunities already lined up after graduation. San Diego County's community colleges thought COVID-19 would boost their enrollment, but instead they lost students. iNews Source investigative reporter Jennifer Bowman has more.
Fewer in-person classes and lower enrollment means these days San Diego County's community colleges are pretty quiet. The Great Recession brought a surge of students to local campuses over a decade ago. But when COVID-19 hit the economy, the colleges saw a 12% drop in their headcount, almost 30,000 fewer students.
We need to get away from the status quo. We need to get away from thinking that the way we're doing business is okay and we're going to survive, and we're not.
Like statewide trends, the local colleges saw the sharpest declines among older attendees. Students 50 and older dropped by over 40%, and students of color had bigger drops than their white counterparts. School leaders say they're struggling with less funding than four-year institutions and increased competition from for-profit colleges. Now they're trying to find ways to bring students back to campus.
All of the programs that we've put in place have been deemed pandemic proof. In other words, there are job opportunities in those sectors, even with the pandemic. And so we're marketing that.
Officials are still hopeful the boost in enrollment will soon come. For KPBS, I'm iNews Source investigative reporter Jennifer Bowman.
Now, iNews Source is an independently funded nonprofit partner of KPBS. To understand how a local comic book store survived the pandemic, you need to look at its origin story. KPBS arts reporter Beth Accomando checks in at Kamikaze to see how it has overcome multiple challenges these past 2 years.
Comic books don't always have superheroes, but if we look to the origin story of Kamikaze, we will find an unlikely hero in Robert Scott. He started the store 30 years ago, stocked it with diverse books, and made it a welcoming environment for customers. He was a champion of comics and the ability of comics to create a community. But in December of 2019, Scott died unexpectedly of health-related issues, leaving the store in the hands of its 2 employees, just as a pandemic was about to shut the world down.
When everything's going well, you can talk about community, and we're a big community.
Lucky Bronson was one of those employees.
But when faced with possibly closing, our customers, our family and friends, they stepped up and started buying stuff and keeping us open. And that's when you know you're part of the community, is when you're at your lowest and people show up.
Bronson now manages Kamikaze. He says it's thanks to the community that Scott built and the eclectic stockpile of books he acquired that the store survived.
Because of all that product we had sitting around and our customers' willingness to try something new, during the pandemic, it definitely kept us afloat.
Hi. Megan Massengill is one of those customers.
During the pandemic, we read more, we tried to do pickup more. It's such a pleasure to have built a relationship, and that's what keeps me coming back and supporting them.
Now, things are sort of back to normal.
Hey guys.
Hey, what's up, man?
Regulars wearing masks of their favorite pop culture icons are back in the store each week to pick up their comic book subscriptions. Gary Dexter dedicates one night a week to what he calls his adult daycare.
I come here, I get here after work, sometime around about 5 o'clock, and I stay till closing time, and we just review the events in Nerdkind for the week, and it's a highlight of my week.
Bronson provides the kind of customer service you won't find online or at a big chain, says Dexter.
Second one of those out. But I have my weekly order. They look after me every week, pull the books that I read. So not only is he looking after your own subscriptions, but he knows what you like. He can recommend stuff for you, exposes you to stuff that you would otherwise miss. And I think that's important in a store of this type.
I don't feel overlooked or looked down upon. As a female identifying customer and comic book fan, I feel welcomed. I feel respected.
Alonzo Nunez is executive director of Little Fish Comic Book Studio, where he's helping to foster the next generation of comics fans and creators.
A comic store really functions as not just a place to buy comics and to get recommendations, but really as a kind of almost community center without overstating it, for nerds, for geeks, for just fans of the comic medium, of manga. And it's really important to have the opportunity, as I like to say, to find something completely out of the blue, to almost literally trip over it on the ground.
This really does look cool, though. I'm so sorry I got distracted. I'm like...
And that's one of the joys of Kamikaze, where not only are the shelves stocked to bursting point with books, but there are boxes lining the walls with treasures waiting to be unearthed.
That's why I like physical shopping for books. I wasn't coming to buy something tonight, but I might grab this.
IDW Publishing is a San Diego-based company. Its new publisher, Nachi Marsham, says it was a small comics shop, not unlike Kamikaze, that hooked him on comics as a kid. Now he appreciates those spaces as more than just a place for nerds to meet and discuss what they love.
From a cold-hearted mercenary aspect of things, like that's just good for the industry and the business in general. Like we want people to be able to get out there and be the ones who are saying, like, what do you mean you've never read this? You have to read this right now. And we're like, yes, please do. We love it a lot too. And it's the lifeblood of, what works for us as we move forward.
Moving forward, Kamikaze still faces challenges, especially with supply chain issues and the ever-changing nature of the pandemic. But it has a community it can count on. Beth Accomando, KPBS News.
For the millions of homes with an Xbox, a mega merger announced this week opens up some interesting possibilities. Mira Kopik tells us why Microsoft is buying up one of the marquee brands in gaming in the Friday Business Report.
Microsoft, the huge prize of Activision Blizzard of $68.7 billion is a sign of what's happening in that whole video game space, especially in the context of the metaverse and what that might mean for massively multiplayer online games and virtual reality and a whole host of different factors. They have some amazing franchises, Call of Duty or World of Warcraft. And one of the issues in the industry and why Microsoft becomes a very interesting company is there's a little dirty secret that gaming companies don't treat their employees well. Most of them, many of them are not salaried employees. They're 1099 employees. They don't get insurance benefits. They don't get healthcare benefits. So this can change. Microsoft is known as a company that really is much more pro-worker. So it'll be very interesting on that front. And the CEO of Microsoft said it is time to reset the culture at Activision Blizzard, which will be interesting to see once they integrate the company into Microsoft.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, why the U.S. and Russia remain at odds over Ukraine despite repeated diplomatic efforts. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
Encinitas is the first city in San Diego County to ban lighter-than-air balloons. North County reporter Alexander Nguyen has more on what that means.
So let's go ahead and vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
With that, Encinitas becomes the first city in the county to ban the sale of lighter-than-air balloons, like helium balloons. It was a campaign that the San Diego Surfrider Foundation worked hard for since last May. They say lighter-than-air balloons endanger animals and cause pollution when they float away and end up in the ocean.
We're really stoked on this development, and we intend to use it to pursue more balloon bans of this type. You know, 1 city down, 17 to go.
Mitch Silverstein is the chapter manager for the San Diego Surfrider Foundation. He says other chapters have already reached out to him for campaign materials to push for a similar ban in their communities. The balloon ban brought out lively debate among residents. Before last night's meeting, the City Council received more than 300 public comments, both for and against the ban. At the meeting, a representative from Party City spoke against the ban. It's the only national retailer in Encinitas that sells helium balloons.
Why do we give helium balloons to children for birthdays? Because they create joy, even more so during a pandemic, and they are an affordable way to make a celebration special.
Joy.
Encinitas Mayor Catherine Blakespear disputes that. She says protecting the environment is more important than the temporary joy balloons bring.
You know, we are going to find ways to celebrate birthdays and to mark occasions, and we always have and we always will. We do not need these type of balloons in order to make that an important event.
The ban will go into effect 30 days after the second reading of the ordinance at the next City Council meeting, slated for February 9th. Alexander Nguyen, KPBS News.
You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Good night.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, proud to support the mission of KPBS and privileged to serve San Diego clients. Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, helping homeowners maintain drain, heating, and cooling systems since 1978. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.